With over 20 years of Vladimir Putin's rule, it's sometimes hard to believe that Russia actually had two other presidents. And even harder, that this was one of them. Dmitry Medvedev was Russia's third president and the only person to be elected in the past 23 years other than Putin. He started the famous reset of the Russia-US relations, became Russia's new hope for a democratic state, and then its biggest disappointment. But how did Dmitry Medvedev go from this?
Я действительно искренне считаю, что свобода лучше, чем не свобода.
И у нас есть очень такие конструктивные, товарищеские рабочие отношения, которые помогают решать самые разные вопросы.
To this.
Цели так называемого глобального Запада в лице Соединенных Штатов Америки и основных прихлебателей – уничтожение России.
Украина – это вообще часть России. Миновала ли угроза ядерного конфликта? Нет, не миновала. Она возросла.
I hate them. They are bastards and freaks. They want us, Russia, to die. And as long as I am alive, I will do everything I can to make them disappear.
And how did the end of his presidency prompt some of the biggest protests across the country, simultaneously solidifying Russia on its path to totalitarianism? Who is Dmitry Medvedev? Like most powerful people in modern Russia, Dmitry Medvedev started his political career working closely with Vladimir Putin for the then mayor of St. Petersburg, Anatoly Sobchak. Putin seemed to be fond of their partnership, and in 2000 he made Medvedev lead his own presidential campaign. Later, in 2020s, Putin would rewrite the constitution to grant himself an indefinite rule, start a full-scale war in Ukraine, and ruthlessly punish anyone to speak out against them. But back in 2008, he was still portraying a somewhat democratic leader.
У меня не было соблазна остаться на третий срок. Никогда. С первого дня работы в качестве президента Российской Федерации я для себя сразу решил, что я не буду нарушать действующую Конституцию.
So when Putin's two official terms came to an end, he left the presidential post, at least formally. The national elections were mainly centered around two candidates, both from Putin's party United Russia and both Putin's close allies. In the second tour of the elections, the tough former head of the security service, Sergei Ivanov, gained the lead. However, Putin decided to opt for the more unassuming Medvedev, and United Russia formally revoked Ivanov's candidacy. Dmitry Medvedev won with just over 70% of the votes. In contrast to the ex-KGB agent Putin, who positioned himself as the heavy-hand imperative to keep Russia together, Medvedev chose a libertarian approach. He constantly spoke of respecting human rights, battling poverty, and investing in education, which to many felt like a breath of fresh air after decades of chaos and corruption. Yet, despite Medvedev's seemingly humanitarian views, less than 4 months after his inauguration, the infamous 5-day war broke out in Georgia, during which Russian troops invaded the country and nearly captured its capital, Tbilisi. This sparked an outrage among Russia's Western partners. But after long negotiations, the Russian government decided to step back and withdraw the military. This willingness to cooperate was what partly triggered the phenomenon known as
reset.
We want to reset our relationship.
Medvedev openly spoke about improving relations with the US and even securing a free travel status with the EU. International media portrayed him as an approachable and open man that liked Western bands.
You have a deep love of heavy metal. Where did that come from? Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, Pink Floyd.
That's from my childhood, my adolescence. Although I lived behind the Soviet Iron Curtain, the music seeped through. We listened to what the whole planet listened to.
All the while, Vladimir Putin remained the country's prime minister and was believed by many to be the actual ruling force within the government.
It's my last election. Yeah. After my election, I have more flexibility.
I understand. I transmit this information to Vladimir.
Moreover, Medvedev's critics were convinced that his election was simply Putin's ploy to later return to power, what they would call castling. But as the next presidential elections approached, it became clear that Medvedev, who was supposed to be Vladimir Putin's loyal successor, was not ready to give up his power. Medvedev was also actively trying to establish a two-party voting system in the country, and Putin was having none of that. Suddenly, it became near impossible for Medvedev to find any support among the ruling elites in Russia, and in September 2011, United Russia officially announced that Vladimir Putin would be their sole candidate for the upcoming elections. Medvedev complied.
Я считаю, что было бы правильно, чтобы съезд поддержал кандидатуру председателя партии Владимира Путина на должность президента страны.
The speech enraged the public. Medvedev instantly started trending in Russian social media under the hashtag #pathetic, and before the elections could end, people took to the streets. Protests broke out all over the country and lasted nearly 4 months. Hundreds of thousands of people came out to protest the mass falsifications and violations of the federal law. But first and foremost, they were protesting Putin.
Это наш город! Мы отберем столицу у жуликов и воров! Мы вернем себе Москву! Мы обязательно победим! Россия будет свободной!
The protesters were met with severe police brutality and repressions against the leaders of the opposition, most of whom, including Ilya Yashin, are now either imprisoned or deceased. But Putin simply moved on to legitimize his presidency. The Russian government revoked Medvedev's laws and refused all of his planned innovations. Despite serving as the prime minister for a while, Medvedev was left with little influence in the Kremlin. Public's disdain was immense as he was slowly being stripped of any political power. It had also come to light that Medvedev, who actively pushed for anti-corruption laws during his presidency, was involved in numerous corruption schemes that allowed him to buy multiple luxurious mansions, a private island just for fishing, and private vineyards in Tuscany with a territory of nearly 11 million square feet. But Dmitry Medvedev didn't give up on politics. He knew exactly what he had to do to get back on Putin's good side.
Biden says the UK will not supply Ukraine with missile systems capable of striking Russia. Makes sense. Otherwise, when attacking our cities, the Russian armed forces would have carried out our threat and struck at the centers of these criminal decisions. Some of them are not in Kyiv at all. I don't need to explain what's next.
Медведев, кажется, осознал, что единственный способ сделать карьеру в нынешней системе власти – это быть большим Путиным, чем сам Путин.
His once pro-Western rhetoric changed to this.
Однополярному миру пришел конец. Соединенные Штаты больше не являются хозяевами планеты Земля.
His anti-Stalinist stance to this.
Medvedev says it is possible to bring back the death penalty without changing the constitution.
He is just as active on social media as he was back in 2008. But now, his official channels are filled with hate towards Ukrainian officials and constant nuclear threats. So was Dmitry Medvedev ever a libertarian? A question that many Russians ask themselves. After all, many of his policies didn't differ much from Putin's usual course of action, and a lot of his promised reforms were either never acted upon or didn't have a significant impact. But what his presidency did achieve was making the Russian public realize just how badly they wanted change. He gave people hope for a democracy and a fair judicial system. The ordinary citizens could not help but long for the Russia that he envisioned.